Okay, we're looking at the second and third sections of Chapter 18 about the Enlightenment. Okay, the Enlightenment is this wonderful time when new ideas, equality, freedom, taking away the power of absolute kings, giving the people a say through government, through constitutions, these ideas were entering the world. How were they spread? Well, Diderot, we studied him earlier. He wrote an encyclopedia, 26 volumes, and the upper classes bought that, and all the articles had this slant of Enlightenment thinking in them. So the encyclopedia, which is the Wikipedia of its day, that had Enlightenment ideas. Then coffee houses, people met in coffee houses, sort of like Starbucks all over the U.S. People going to coffee houses and ideas spread. Salons were like high-end living rooms for the wealthy, and they had these special gatherings where the intelligent would gather and meet, and those were the people that did the writing, published papers, were the thinkers, and so that had a strong hand in helping the Enlightenment spread. So those are the main ways it spread. But you need to know about enlightened despots. Enlightened despots are leaders of countries. They're called enlightened because they believed in some of the ideas of the Enlightenment. They're called despots because they were rulers that had a lot of authority. Normally people we don't think of as being enlightened. We think of the dictators, the strong rulers, as being people that crush people. But the three enlightened despots we're going to talk about are Frederick the Great from Prussia, and he tolerated religious differences. That's an Enlightenment idea. You shouldn't just be a Catholic or just be a Protestant. Give everybody freedom. So Frederick the Great in Prussia, an enlightened despot. Catherine the Great in Russia. Now Russia had the most autocratic, strong rulers at the time, but she did speak against serfdom, and she wanted to give the nobles some rights. But she ruthlessly crushed a serf's revolt, so she couldn't live up to her own Enlightenment ideas, but at least she did verbalize believing that serfdom shouldn't exist. And then Joseph II in Austria, he was the most radical. He chose middle-class officials for his cabinet instead of nobles. That was like, whoa, how can he do that? He's not taking the wealthy families, he's taking middle-class people. He granted toleration to Protestants and Jews in his Catholic country, and he put the church under royal control. So these are the enlightened despots. The Enlightenment was mostly a middle and upper class movement because it was a movement of ideas, and you have to sort of be wealthy to have the luxury of just living and talking about ideas. Usually the lower classes are just concerned about making a living. And so pretty much the peasant class remained what it had always been, for centuries and centuries in the past, but still some peasants began to feel and embrace the Enlightenment. Okay, 1803, Britain at mid-century. Why did Britain rise to global prominence in the 1700s? It became, the most powerful country in the world. Well, its location, it's an island nation north of Europe, so it developed a very strong navy. That was powerful, and so that gave them success in war. They had victories against France, who was their main competitor around the globe at this time. They won the 7 Years' War, which is a war fought partly in America. And ideas of freedom existed in Britain, from the Magna Carta and the Glorious Revolution. It had a good business climate. They merged with Scotland, which led to great economic benefits for both Scotland and England. And they began to try and take over Ireland. They sent Protestants there to live among the Catholics and started, the Irish Catholics began to persecute them. Constitutional government, Britain became the model for that around the world. A constitutional government is a government that's limited by law. You've got a constitution, and this constitution says the king can do some things and can't do others. It limits the king. So constitutional government, government limited by law. There were political parties, we'll talk about in a minute, the Whigs and the Tories. A cabinet developed, which was a group of advisors who advised the king. They got power, so it wasn't the king could do everything. The cabinet became powerful. Now, King George III came in and sort of tried to get rid of the cabinet, and he asserted power. He's the one that started taxing in the colonies. So the two parties I talked about were the Whigs. Those were the ones that had the Enlightenment ideas. They were the liberal ideas, the ideas that are the new ideas in the world. They tended to be the newly arisen middle class. The Tories were the conservatives. They were the families that had always been wealthy and that had always used proper relationships. And so kind of the Whigs and the Tories were the two parties that arose. Now the cabinet that advised the king was made up of the leaders of the majority party. So whichever party had the majority between the Whigs and the Tories, they would make the cabinet up. And most of the in the 1700s, the Whigs, the ones that had the Enlightenment ideas, they were the ones that ran Parliament. So they were really kind of in control. And it was their leader who was called the Prime Minister, the head of the cabinet. So you can see in the drawing I have to the right there, the king, he's at the top. But more and more, the two parties that were there, the party that won the most of the legislature, most of the votes in the legislature, they're the ones that had the cabinet to advise the king, and then he was run by the prime minister. So more and more, the British began to look to the prime minister as their leader, not the king. Although George III tried to reassert royal power, he's the one that really started messing with the colonies and saying you need to pay more taxes and stuff, which led to the American Revolution, which we'll study in the next section.